Hey everybody, Jimmy here, and I'm joined by Justin, and that means we're going to be talking about long-range stuff. I think you guys have probably gathered that by now, but Justin, we're going to talk about, well, it's always in long range, it seems to be related to ballistics, but we're going to talk about almost, I think today's sort of some level of acceptable versus maybe unacceptable error in various measurements that you have with your firearm and the ammo that you're shooting and all that good stuff. What is a notable error to make that you should probably try to, I guess, stay within that spec or something like that? Or and then at what point does it become like a diminishing level of, or what do they used to?
Diminishing returns?
Diminishing marginal returns, something like that, where, okay, now you're just fretting too much about little tiny things.
Absolutely.
So where is our little sweet spot?
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to kind of think about it or break it down, it's like, how much does it matter type of thing. And talking about some of the biggest reasons for misses at distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that can be kind of broken down into several different things. But today I think we're going to focus on errors in wind calls, errors in ranging. We're going to talk about muzzle velocity SDs, as well as group size.
Cool. SDs being standard deviation, for those who aren't familiar. That's something that you're probably going to start to be pretty familiar with as soon as you start strapping a chronograph onto your gun or shooting over a chronograph or something like that. It's a figure you're going to start to see and hear a lot of people talk about. So
absolutely.
Justin, where do you want to start? Because some of those things are they all external things, or are some of them considered internal things?
I mean, when you talk about, for example, like group size and things like that, so whether your rifle is capable of like 1 MOA at 100 yards or in 1 MOA is 1 MOA, so it doesn't really matter. So that can, yes, be affected by internal ballistics.
Sure.
Is that twist rate, ideal for that certain projectile you're shooting, things like that.
Let's talk about that one first, like the group size, because I feel like that's one that a lot of people, they focus on, because whether you have any special equipment or not, anybody can go out and shoot a group at 100 yards, say, and assess both their gun and them as a shooter, their accuracy potential and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Of course, we're going to assume throughout most of this that you have the marksmanship side down. So that's not a factor in this. We're actually going to talk about the group size that the gun is capable of. You mentioned a phrase that people will hear a lot, sub-MOA. Very, very popular. Basically, that means that if you were to draw a 1 MOA circle around your bullseye or whatever it is, the center of the target that you're aiming at, that all of your impacts are within that 1 MOA circle. Now, roughly at 100 yards, it's pretty much like an inch circle.
Yep.
So, if we can achieve that, then it gives you some warm and fuzzies about what you'll be able to achieve further on down the line, because, Justin, of, this level of error that we're operating within, or this level of I guess I'll say deviation, even though we're talking about standard deviation with muzzle velocity, but this level of deviation that we can expect just out of the rifle inherently.
Absolutely. So 1 MOA at 100 yards is roughly an inch. And today we're just going to be kind of rounding and maybe using shooter math instead. In all actuality, 1 MOA at 100 yards is going to be 1.047 inches. Mm-hmm. So for today, just kind of keeping things simple across the board, we're just going to kind of say like roughly 1 inch.
Sure. Makes sense.
So we can start deducing things, like you said, with that deviation when it comes to group size. So, for example, if you shoot a 1-inch group at 100 yards, you can expect to roughly, in theory, get a 2-inch group at 200 yards, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. A lot of other variables come into play, but at least you have a pretty good understanding of where you may be at.
And if you extrapolate that over the course of varying distances, again, like you said, there are other variables at play, but let's just say we're going to assume that we are kind of doing that, 1 MOA at 100 yards thing. Well, let's say we're shooting at a target at 800 yards, and it's, this would be a really tough target to shoot at. But if it was like an 8-inch piece of steel at 800 yards,
you should be able to hit it. Right?
Right. In theory, you should be able to hit it with a sub-MOA gun, that's capable of that. But if you have a gun that's shooting more than 1 MOA, then you may, even though you've executed the fundamentals properly, you've put the crosshairs on the target, yada, yada, you've shot, because of the gun's capability, you may still miss. That's kind of what this gets at, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That would be sporty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I would say
absolutely. But, okay, so Justin, what's the important thing to try and stay within for your accuracy
standards? I would say
standards?
Not too long ago, everybody, when they were talking about precision rifles, 1 inch was the standard, right? However, now for a very affordable price, you can go out and buy a hunting rifle that may, again, shoot below 1 inch at or less than 1 inch at 100 yards. So now when we talk about precision rifles, everybody's like, well, now precision rifles, kind of with advancements and things like that, most people are like, oh, I need a 1/2 inch gun, or I need a 1/4 inch gun. And honestly, I don't believe that's the case at all. I honestly think if you're right around 3/4 MOA at 100 yards, you're just fine. That's not going to be the limiting factor for most people getting hits out to 1,000 yards.
Okay. Now, why is that exactly? Like, what you've got all these,
absolutely.
you brought in these printouts, and of course, usually on the other podcast, I give my cohort Mark a lot of crap for bringing the printouts, but you've got some tables and things here. So
absolutely.
How did you come to the conclusion that?
So there's different programs out there, different software programs that can run certain simulations. So you can go ahead, kind of input all of your data, and it's going to run hundreds and hundreds of certain shot simulations.
Okay.
And all we have to kind of do is change a few parameters. So basically what we did is we went ahead and input the range to 1,000 yards. All right, because that's kind of the magic number, everybody.
Yeah.
So, and we put it at, say, a 20-inch target. So it's a 2 MOA target.
Yeah.
Right? Now, what we did was we kind of went ahead and I don't know if you guys can see this or the viewers at home or listeners at home.
They won't be able to. We'll have to explain it because you printed it out in size 7 font.
So basically what we're using this is just for a reference for us since there's a lot of numbers to work with. But if everything's being perfect, now you have a 1-inch group.
Okay, if you get a 1-inch gun.
Yep, a 1-inch group or a 1 MOA gun at 1,000 yards, your hit probability is roughly 92%.
Okay.
Now, why is it 92%? Well, because now we have other factors that come into play, such as wind and atmospherics and all of that other stuff, right?
And do they factor in at all, or do they always assume like a perfect shooter?
So for this, I think I calculated in plus or minus, I think maybe like 1.5 miles per hour of wind deviation.
Okay.
So saying a 5 mile per hour wind for this certain simulation, I said we were able to call the wind plus or minus like maybe 1.5 miles per hour.
Oh, okay, got it.
All right, because again, we'll talk about wind calling later on. So I think 1.5 miles per hour is fairly realistic. Okay, so what you're going to notice is your hit probability right off the bat is about 92% for a 2 MOA target at 1,000 yards, which is pretty good.
Okay, yeah, I would say so.
If we decrease that group size from a 1-inch gun down to a 3/4 inch gun, our hit probability is going to go up to 92.5%. So about a 0.5%.
Didn't go up as much as I thought it was going to go up.
All right.
Got to be honest.
Not at all.
Okay.
Right? Because it is a 2 MOA target.
Yeah.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to decrease that group size from 3/4 of an inch down to a 1/2 inch. All right. So at 100 yards, you're shooting a 1/2 inch gun.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Oh, that's something to brag about.
So now going from a 3/4 inch gun down to a 1/2 inch gun, your hit probability goes up 0.3%.
Really?
That's it.
Wow.
Now, again, distance to the target, size of the target. Say we took this target, that's 2 MOA, and we decrease that. Obviously, you're going to see your numbers increase a little bit better for percentage hits.
The spread may be a little bit wider. Okay.
So basically, what you're looking at is minimal amount of returns you're going to get, hit probability-wise.
Right.
So now you're going to take that 1/2 inch group. We're going to go down and say it's a 1/4 MOA gun.
Sure. But basically, at that point, it's like a 1-hole gun.
Absolutely. What does your hit probability do? It increases 0.2%.
Okay.
All right. So you're looking at increase from 1 inch down to 3/4 of an inch. Your hit probability is going to increase about 0.5%. However, if you go from a half down to a 1/4, it's only going to go up, 0.2%.
Yeah, okay, I see.
So what we're looking at now is probably right around 3/4 of a minute. So everybody's chasing that, I need a 1/2 inch gun. I need a 3/4 MOA gun, right?
Yeah.
At that point.
Or if I'm not shooting 1 hole, I got to keep trying. I got to get back to the reloading bench.
Doesn't really matter. That's not going to be the determining factor if you get a miss at distance.
I see. That makes sense. So, okay. In this case, get a reasonably accurate gun.
Absolutely.
And then start trying to focus on other things that could be making you miss at distance.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be that group size that's like, oh, man, I tell you what, I would have hit that target if this would have been a 1/4 inch gun instead of a 1/2 inch gun.
Correct.
Okay. So, all right, that's the group size. Now, how about this standard deviation thing? Because that's also something, again,
absolutely.
during your sight-in process, maybe when you're sighted in, you stick the chronograph on or around the gun, you shoot with that, and okay, now I'm seeing these SD numbers, and you see people chasing single-digit SDs, and they're like, you got to get them as low as possible because you don't want that spread of muzzle velocities every time you shoot being all over the place.
Correct.
What do we got?
So for those hand loaders out there, or for any other individual using, match grade factory ammo, you may be kind of trying to find that happy medium. What shoots good regarding group size. However, we also need, an acceptable margin for error when we talk about muzzle velocity standard deviation. So a lot of hand loaders out there, they're chasing those single digits. I need like, 3 or less. I need 5 or less. In all actuality, I would say 10 and below is acceptable.
Okay.
Anywhere 10 and below is fine. Shoot, I would even venture to say 15 and below. However, I'm going to caveat that, though, with we're kind of focusing at 1,000 yards. At roughly, let's say, maybe for this case, a 1 MOA target. So a 10-inch circle at 1,000 yards. All right, that's kind of what I ran for this simulation.
Okay.
So obviously, if you're shooting out there extreme long range, when it comes to, again, center fired rifles, extreme long range is going to be different if we're shooting rimfire. So, but for this printout, I went from 15 feet per second in standard deviation, and I went all the way down to 1.
Wow.
And we kind of ran the simulation for a 1 MOA target at 1,000 yards. So for 15 feet per second standard deviation at 1,000 yards on a 1 MOA target, you're looking at a hit probability of about 57%. Because we have all those other factors we have to, come into play.
We're isolating one thing at a time,
absolutely.
So I get it.
Now, this is a much smaller target than we were just talking about with the group size simulation.
Right.
So a 10-inch target at 1,000 yards, and if you have a muzzle velocity with standard deviation of 15 feet per second, you're looking at a hit probability of about 57%.
Right.
So if we decrease that, say, down to 10 feet per second.
Okay.
All right.
And just to even further clarify, too, so that is you have a muzzle velocity, and basically with each shot you take, if your standard deviation is 10, that means that, generally speaking, the muzzle velocity should be within 10 feet per second of your given muzzle velocity that you've plugged in. Is that how that works?
Yes and no. And the reason I say no is because that's going to be one standard deviation. So you can assume a percentage of those rounds are going to fall within that.
Yeah.
And we can break that down into a little bit more. So now if you have 2 standard deviations, that's going to be a bigger pool of those rounds. And I want to say it's like 67% roughly with 1 standard deviation.
That's right. 1 standard deviation. It's not every single round that leaves the base.
Absolutely.
It's the majority.
Correct.
Right? Okay,
Yep.
got it. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to, but I'm just trying to clarify again. So when you're saying standard deviation 10 feet per second, for people who are totally new, it's not that the bullet is leaving the barrel at 10 feet per second or something like that. Like it just, Anyway, carry on. So if your standard deviation is 10 feet per second, what's our hit probability?
It goes up to 61 even across the board. So 61%.
All right.
So you're looking at almost a 4% increase. Mm-hmm. Okay. Which is pretty good.
Yeah,
right?
Not bad.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to start breaking it down in smaller increments. So instead of 5 feet per second, we're going to go down. No, go ahead.
I'm just thinking because we have to reiterate, too, that we're isolating things. So the only thing you changed in this scenario was the standard deviation.
Correct. Everything else remained the same.
And boom, 4%.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. I interrupted.
No, that's fine. Now, so if we go from 10 feet per second down to 7 feet per second, all right, we're at 61% even with a standard deviation of 10. If we go to a standard deviation of 7, all right, it goes from 61% up to 62.3%.
Okay. Got it. There's our diminishing returns starting to show.
So now instead of about a 4% increase going from, say, 15 to 10, now going from 10 to 7, we only increase it about a little over 1%.
Okay.
So now if we go from 7 down to 5 feet per second, our hit probability goes from 62.3 up to 62.8.
Got it.
So you're looking at those diminishing returns.
Really kind of dropped off. Yeah.
So those people who are like, okay, I need 5 or less. Really not the case. It's gonna increase your hit probability, which is what everybody wants. right? However, now you're only looking at like 0.5%. So now if you go from 5 feet per second standard deviation down to 3 feet per second standard deviation, it's going to go up, again, 0.1%.
Mm-hmm.
So in all actuality, really, it's very minimal.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to caveat this with we're talking about a 1 MOA target at 1,000 yards.
Right.
So if we talk about, same size target at extended distances, we want to be a little bit more precise. Mm-hmm. However, 1,000 yards is a pretty far shot.
Yeah, it's a far shot for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely not as much allure to it as there once was, I feel like, because it is so much within the realm of possibility with modern tools that we have at our disposal. But still, hey, it's an awesome benchmark.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
All right.
So we can kind of see from 10 feet per second standard deviation all the way down to, say, 1 feet per second, right? So 1 feet per second standard deviation, you're hand loading, you're like, I got these SDs down to 1, right? Your hit probability at that point is only going to be 63.3%. So it's going to increase, 2%?
Yeah. So okay.
Now that's 2 shots out of 100. Mm-hmm. So, which again seems minimal, but again we want to be as precise as possible, and we want those hits.
Yeah.
So if we can squeeze every last bit out of our system, that's what we're aiming for. But again, maybe we should be focusing on different things at that point.
Because I have to imagine if your gun is shooting where your standard deviation is, say, 7, and you're like, this is amazing, but I need to chase 5, and I need to chase 3, and I need to chase 1. But meanwhile, your groups are terrible. Like, you're not even shooting a MOA group.
Yeah.
That's where you're kind of like, okay, hey, focus on these things that are going to get you to these at least sweet spots first in every category, if you will.
Yep.
And then if you want to fully nerd out and go further in each one, but definitely don't leave one hanging in favor of the other.
Exactly. So, for example, if you have a gun that's capable of a 3/4 inch group at 100 yards, and you're looking at around maybe 7 feet per second standard deviation, I would say that's a pretty decent setup versus having, say, a 1/4 MOA gun. Mm-hmm. And now you're like, okay, well, my standard deviation jumps up to, say, 10.
Yeah.
All right. Or vice versa. Just trying to, like you said, find that happy medium between the two.
Yeah. So some of the other things that you brought in were wind and range estimations.
Yes.
Because this is, if you call your wind that you've plugged into the ballistics calculator incorrectly, how big of a difference is that going to make? If you shooting at a target. Now, sometimes this happens, I will say, with the range estimation thing. It's not just because we sell range finders, and of course I'd love it if you bought as many of them as you want, or as you can. But even sometimes you go to a range and they got a really long firing line, and they've got all the targets set up, and there's markers next to the target. First off, they may not have the markers set perfectly or the target set perfectly. Can't tell you how many ranges I've been to where you range the 800-yard target, and it's like 795, I mean, doesn't seem like a huge difference, but, I mean, maybe Justin will get into how much of a difference that could be.
Yeah.
It could also just depend on where you're at in relation to the target. Maybe from the point that they ranged the target when they set up the targets, it was exactly a 900-yard target, but you're shooting way over on the far side, and so it's a little bit different. So which one are we going to go into first, Justin?
Errors and ranging.
Errors and ranging. Okay,
yep.
Cool. So tell us how big of a difference that can be.
A lot more than most people think.
Right.
Especially when we start talking about extended distances.
Yes.
So like you said, 800 beyond, shoot even, I would say, 500 plus. Mm-hmm. We have to be a lot more precise in those ranges. Errors in ranging are going to be more of a contributing factor for misses at distance than your group size, than your standard deviation. And we're going to get into why here in a little bit. So for this simulation, we kept the target at the same distance, 1,000 yards. And so what I kind of want to point out...
Is it still a 1 MOA target? Or 2 MOA?
2 MOA target for this
2 MOA target now.
Yep. So for this one, I just want to clarify, right off the bat, we're going to be talking about a 25-yard deviation in range. Okay. So at 1,000 yards, we're engaging that target for 1,000 yards, but maybe our range estimation is off by 25 yards.
We think it's at 1,000, but in reality, the target's at 975, or it's at
exactly.
like 1025.
So it's only 2.5% error, mm-hmm. right? Which is pretty minimal. Mm-hmm. All right. However, what we can expect though to be off all right, if you're off by that, your hit probability is going to be less than 50%.
Wow.
All right. Now, again, we kind of kept some of the other factors as the same, like, plus or minus 1.5 miles per hour in your wind call and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's pretty significant.
That is. I mean, yeah, that absolutely is. So what happens when we get a little bit better?
So say we take that 25-yard air and we decrease it to 20 yards. We're off 2%.
Yep.
So our hit probability is going to go up to 57.9%.
Okay. Notable.
Now we're going to decrease that 5 more yards. You're plus or minus 15 yards at this point.
Very, very, like, even I'm still at the point where I'm thinking, like, 15 yards. If you got a good rangefinder on you, like, you should be even better than that. But
I would agree.
What happens?
Absolutely. So if you decrease it only 5 yards, all right, your hit probability is going to go from 57.9 up to 70%.
Whoa. That was big.
Yeah, that's a big jump.
That's huge.
Yes.
Okay.
So now we're going to be like, okay, we're going to be a little bit more precise. We're going to take it down to 10 yards. It's going to increase from 70 all the way up to 83.6%. Huge jump. And I believe this might be a 1 MOA target. I believe.
Oh, it is a 1 MOA target. Okay.
Yeah. So the reason being is because we want to just to emphasize the importance of getting a solid range.
Yeah.
So do you think it's possible when we're at the range to be, depending like you said on the firing line, maybe, I would say a 5-yard difference?
Oh, that's easily. Yeah, absolutely.
Easily. So if we drop it down to, say, 5 yards now, all right, now our hit probability is going to go up from 83.6% up to 91.5%.
These jumps are definitely more notable than the other ones.
Absolutely.
Which is, I get what you were saying, then why it's so important to get the range right.
Yep, absolutely. So now we're going to go from 5 yards down to 1.
Yeah.
You're off 1 yard.
Which I think even all the rangefinders, or just about everyone that we have, I believe, is somewhere within the... That's not out of the realm of possibility.
Nope,
like
not
plus
at
or
all.
minus 1 yards within 1,000 yards is absolutely what they're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you're going to be looking at increase of about 1% at that point.
Okay.
So it's going to go up from 91.5% up to 92.6%.
So, range your target.
Yeah.
Have a laser rangefinder, and that's easily going to get you within 5 yards. And wow, what a difference that's going to make.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, like you said, depending on the range you go to, you could be maybe in a different angle on the firing line. Maybe those berms or those targets in front of those berms aren't exactly at that range. So, when in doubt, always get a laser rangefinder.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good lesson learned there. All right. Now, the last one, of course, is wind.
Absolutely.
This is the one that I hate to even think about because I'm like, oh, man, I can get all this other stuff. I can measure it. It's just really easy. And then the wind is always changing. It's a pain in the butt. I like to act like it doesn't exist, just pretend it's not there.
It'd be nice, right, if we had like an indoor 1,000-yard range.
Yeah. Okay, so your wind estimation. If your wind estimation is off, significantly to very, very, very little, and you're almost exactly right. Like, what are we seeing?
So for this one, we went back up to a 2 MOA target.
Okay.
Pretty decent size target. If you think about it, it's 20 inches, but we're at 1,000 yards. All right, so a 20-inch by 20-inch target is still a pretty spicy target, I would say, for 1,000 yards.
Yeah, it's usually
for
if you're
a lot of
shooting
shooters.
a lot of times you see them on ranges. Like you hear 20 inches and you think that's pretty big, but when you see it on a range at 1,000, it's really not that big. That's most silhouettes, I think, are right in that 18 to 20 inch range. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for most shooters, a 2 MOA target at 1,000 yards, that's a pretty dicey target. So for this one, what we did was we set the wind speed, the actual wind speed, at 5 miles per hour.
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about the deviations from that actual wind speed.
Okay.
So if you're plus or minus 7 miles per hour in your wind call, for a lot of people, that's very possible. Your hit probability is going to be only about 30.5%.
Brutal.
Yeah. So having a nice technical reticle to make that second round correction is going to be pretty paramount.
Okay. So that's for those people who like to act like wind just doesn't exist. Now we know.
So now what we're going to do is we are going to make a lot smaller increments versus our other simulations. We're just going to go down 1 mile per hour.
Okay.
Because I want to, emphasize the importance. So now, instead of being off 7 miles per hour, we're going to be only off 6 miles per hour.
Okay.
Hit probability goes up to only 35.3%.
Oh, not that. Okay.
No, still 5%.
Yeah.
But again, not great. So jumping down to 5 miles per hour, your probability is going to go up to 41.8%.
Okay.
Okay. Down to 4 miles per hour. All right. We're looking pretty good at that point. 50%. Almost 51%.
Wow. I feel like that was a more notable jump than even the first couple.
So now we're going to be getting a lot more precise with our wind calls. Down to 3 miles per hour. With a 3 mile per hour plus or minus in your wind call at 1,000 yards for a 2 MOA target, your hit probability is going to go up to 64.1%.
Sweet.
So we just made a jump of what? 14?
Yeah.
Pretty solid. All right. So now if we can make a better wind call, we're only plus or minus 2 miles per hour in our wind call. All right. Our hit probability is going to go from 64.1% all the way up to 82.8%.
This is the opposite of diminishing returns.
Makes a big difference when
advancing
you talk about
returns or something. It's great. Flourishing returns.
Exactly. Now, for the viewers and listeners, I would say most elite wind callers in average conditions could probably call winds plus or minus about 2 miles per hour.
Okay. And they're using things like how familiar they are with what grass looks like when it's blown down at 5 miles an hour versus 2 miles an hour. They're using things like
Mirage. They're going to be looking at Mirage quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yep. They may have a weather meter, various different locations, things like that. Now, everybody has a different kind of process they go through calling winds, but like you said, looking at the vegetation, the terrain, the mirage, and things like that.
Okay.
So 2 miles per hour, that's going to get us a hit probability of 82.8% for that first round shot. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take it down to 1 mile per hour.
You're really good.
Really good. And I would say most elite wind callers could probably call winds maybe plus or minus 1 mile per hour in, easy conditions. What you're going to be looking at now is a hit probability of almost 100%. You're looking at 99.1%. 99.1% if you can call winds plus or minus 1 mile per hour.
So, Justin, what you've done here is we've talked about the first two things were very gun and ammo related, which everyone loves to focus on because they're tangible things that we can mess around with, and we don't have to actually go out and put in the work of shooting and training and all that. I mean, if I'm being really honest, of course we have to put in the work of messing around with those things or reloading and stuff, but people get really wrapped up in their gear and not enough, obviously, in the actual skill element of it, which, ranging, it doesn't even take skill hardly anymore. You just basically have to hold a rangefinder still and range a target.
Absolutely.
But that wind is, holy smokes.
By far.
Because before we were talking about, okay, my SD, I fiddle with that a little bit. I'm like, yeah, we're talking like 90s in terms of percentage. And, but that was assuming a pretty darn good wind call, about 1.5 miles an hour deviation. So, it was kind of like, why don't I hit a target at 1,000 yards more often if I'm shooting a sub-MOA gun and my standard deviations are single digits? I'll tell you why. Wind.
By far. Two biggest reasons for misses at distance. One, across the board, it's wind. Second to that, I would say errors in ranging.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of start, like you said, kind of the equipment and things like that.
Pay attention to the stuff that's really important.
Yep. So how much does it matter? Wind, a lot.
Justin gave you real live numbers there, calculated out. I mean, stat stuff. It's kind of mind-boggling when you kind of start breaking it down. Mm-hmm.
Wind, I think, is more of an art than a science, and it's kind of like a perishable skill. You have to stay on it.
Sure. Which, that's something we go over in our long-range classes, especially in long-range 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, long-range 2, basically we focus solely on wind.
Yeah, so long-range 1, we do a lot of the marksmanship stuff, really getting you going, and then that's where you're going to want to stick around for long-range 2, come back for long-range 2, something like that. Of course, it's important in long-range 3 as well. We work in other stuff, but I had to plug it. You're listening to Vortex Edge podcast. Am I right? What did you think we weren't going to plug coming and taking a class? But that way, it's learning to read wind without a good instructor and a good teacher who understands the topic of wind is kind of difficult. Otherwise, you just look out and you're like, oh.
Yeah, and you can have opposing winds, which gets even trickier. Headwinds, tailwinds.
Yeah.
The wind's always switching. So
It is.
So unlike the group size and SDs, which are like constants in this scenario, wind is not a constant. So and that's why it's so hard to start to account for.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Justin, thank you for the statistics.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening to this, if you have any questions about stuff we went over, definitely hit us up. Let us know in the comments. And we can maybe further elaborate on it in a future episode or just hit you back in the old comments. But if this long range stuff is interesting, definitely let us know if there's other topics that are related to long range that you'd like to hear. And probably it's going to be Justin or Corey who's going to be joining me to talk about it. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
See you guys.